One of the things that comes up frequently, Linda, is this whole question of different kinds of ET life forms. And many people will ask, well, gee, are they all humanoid? And they don't really use that term properly. So I want to do some definitions first. The ET life forms that our contact groups have experienced and seen, and as you're going to hear about, photographed, are all humanoid in the sense that they are 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and a torso, and are upright. And this seems to be a morphogenic field, as Rupert Sheldrake would call it, where apparently the universal concept of man, and by man I don't mean the gender male, but man as in a universal symbol, the kind of symbol that Leonardo da Vinci put inside a circle that showed man, that is like a 5-pointed star. If you look at a 5-pointed star, you got a head on top, 2 arms, 2 legs, and that's considered the most sacred universal symbol, by the way, is the 5-pointed star for that reason. And I think that this is a universal morphogenic field that works, and once, according to the Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic field theory, is that because the whole cosmos is awake, and because the whole universe is a conscious quantum hologram where the fullness of intelligence is present at every point in space and time, that when a certain pattern begins to evolve and work, it then gets replicated at remote places without any linear contact. It's sort of like the 100th monkey phenomenon, where an island with a group of monkeys learn a new social skill or hunting skill or what have you, and they will find that at the same time a group of monkeys on another island that had no direct contact begin doing the same thing, that there's this sort of collective great conscious integrating switchboard in existence that integrates everything happening, and that when something works, it replicates and is used at remote places. And it seems that higher intelligent life forms, rather than being, like a circular jellyfish or what have you, tend to be these humanoid in shape. Now, what's interesting is that what we've experienced, and I have also heard this from people who've worked in classified projects that have been present at the retrieval of extraterrestrial bodies when we have unfortunately shot down using electromagnetic weapons some of these spacecraft, that the bodies that are retrieved may be very small or very tall or various skin colors or even types of skin and various facial structures and hairless or with hair, but that they all are humanoid. They have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. So when I say humanoid, I don't mean human-like. I mean that morphology, that shape. So I want to get that definition out there, because many times people will say, well, was the ET humanoid? And they mean looking just like a human, and that is not what humanoid means. So definitional requirements are very important so we know we're speaking the same language. So when I say humanoid, I just mean a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso. Now, within that, there's enormous variation. One of the Disclosure Project witnesses back in the 90s had told me that they had learned that there were several dozen different planetary species that over the years had been cataloged in classified projects that dealt with retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles and in studying this issue. And of course, in the pop culture, everyone thinks of the big bug-eyed grays or the reptilians, which of course ironically are the ones that are man-made program life forms that are genetically created creatures, and many people that have worked in those projects have come forward to describe to us exactly how that's done. So the irony is that the public perception of ET is actually the disinformation man-made image, and the actual ETs that have been retrieved aren't very much like that, although there are a couple species that might roughly fit into the shape and size of what might be called quote-unquote a gray or what have you, but that they are more than just that. There's a whole range of beings, and some of them obviously have descended from different types of creatures to begin with. For example, and this is where this conversation gets very interesting from a anthropological point of view, and then trying to extrapolate that to what we know from extraterrestrial studies, both with what we've done and also in classified projects with some 550 military and intelligence and corporate people that I have spoken with and interviewed over the years. And what I have found is that while there's no doubt that humans, now I'm not saying humanoids, but Homo sapiens, humans, have descended from, or certainly have a genetic shared root with primates. We have 98 or 98.5, depending on who you read, percent. So some 98% of our genetic code is identical to a chimpanzee or a gorilla. Now, that's a lot, but still, that 2% is also a lot. And that is the big question of how did the 2% come about? Was it all purely evolutional, or was there also some intervention? I think it's both. And secondly, what does it mean that Homo sapiens have descended from primates? And I think that the primate studies that are being done around the world, pioneered by people like Jane Goodall and others, but more recent studies that have been done are very interesting, because what's being found, although some people don't like hearing this because they always have this idea of, quote-unquote, the noble savage, is that the many primate species organize not only into tribes, but engage in intertribal violence. And in fact, it has been recorded that chimpanzees and others have organized into warfare. Now, it's been pointed out that may be due to the stress of a shrinking habitat and things that are being imposed upon their environment by humans. But nevertheless, the question becomes that the facts are what they are, and that is that primates are noted to kill each other. Now, what's also interesting when you look at that, because this is the bane of human existence, is prejudice and fear of people who are different from us, and, of course, various forms of racism and misogyny and bigotry and separation and what have you that has led to organized warfare around various differentiating qualities, whether it be skin color or religion or ethnicity or what have you. But that there is a root for that within humanity that has to be transcended, that is probably carried over from our connection to our very roots, as 98% being identical with primates. And this, of course, is always the big question of our overcoming some of the aspects of humans that are within all of us and that we have to overcome and control and find ways to resolve that are nonviolent and doesn't result in massive warfare now that we're in the era of weapons of mass destruction. So this is a very, very interesting discussion, and there have been, of course, many books written on this issue. Now, if you look at this, though, in terms of other phyla of animals, let's take, for example, canines. Well, dogs, for example, and wolves. Now, it's interesting because years ago when I was in college, I read a very interesting book about wolves and how maligned they were. And, of course, many people say, oh, my God, that person's like a wolf and this and that. But in reality, wolves don't kill each other. They may have a pecking order with an alpha wolf and a omega wolf and a beta wolf, and they may attack an intruding wolf just to teach it a lesson. But actually they don't go to the point of killing each other, whereas the dove of peace, will peck each other to death. So what's interesting is that even within the human sort of prejudice of other species, there is this tendency to assume that wolves are violent and doves are not. when in reality doves have been known to be so territorial as to kill each other, their own kind, whereas wolves do not do so. So should it be the wolf of peace instead of the dove of peace? It's very interesting. Now, I throw out these issues not just because I tend to be a bit of a contrarian in terms of what conventional wisdom in society is saying, but also to bring up this question of what does it mean that there are civilizations from other planetary systems, I have been informed, that have evolved from a lineage for which there's no concept of violence amongst themselves and or the concept of warfare? Very interesting question.
You know, one thing that I'd like to interject here is that people might be thinking, well, wolves do kill prey, so do cetaceans kill their prey, and sometimes they even act together in groups or packs to attack their prey, but that's a whole different thing. That is not warfare, that's eating, and they happen to be predators, and that's their food.
Right, it is
a very
different
deal.
Every living animal eats something, even if it's a plant. And of course, they found that plants have a certain consciousness about them. Although I think it's certainly more grievous to kill a higher intelligent animal than a carrot. Nevertheless, the question is, your point is exactly correct. That many animals will organize into hunting packs to feed themselves, to survive, but it isn't done for the sake of killing. It's to survive. And as opposed to territorialism where there's murder or organized warfare within the species, which humans do. And also, quite interestingly, it's now being established that primates do. Even if there are environmental stressors that have led to that, that's beside the point. They still engage in that. Whereas you don't see that. I mean, you don't see dolphins killing each other. You don't see many other species doing this. And so we know that this is part of the real challenge of humanity, is to transcend into a higher state of spiritual awareness to control those proclivities so we don't engage in not only murder of people, which as an emergency doctor I used to see with great frequency in the ER. Under the most ridiculous circumstances, people would come in having been murdered or severely attacked and then subsequently die for the most trivial reasons. But also you see nation-states and city-states and tribes going back many thousands of years organizing into organized murder, which is, of course, warfare. And I think that we have to understand that there are civilizations that exist that are interstellar, that have evolved from lineages that don't have that concept at all, in the least. Now, of course, everyone gets trapped into Star Trek and Star Wars and whatever the movie du jour is, where it's one rampaging Klingon after another fighting each other. But that's much more of an anthropocentric projection, where we're projecting our own baggage, as it were, into space, than the apparent order that's out there. And I think that we have to take a look in the mirror. In fact, I think that it's very interesting that a lot of the way people will assume that our interstellar extraterrestrial visitors are violent is much more of a statement about ourselves. And it's basically the way people regard this entire subject, I think, is a giant, not only a Rorschach test, but a big mirror that reflects more about what the person is about than what is actually being intended. Because obviously, if you go through an analysis of this, any civilization capable of going faster than the speed of light, dematerializing at one point in space and rematerializing light years or galaxies away at another place like Earth, their technologies are so advanced that if they were inclined to weaponize them and be hostile towards, say, a planet like ours that's beginning to go into space with weapons and has killed almost 200 million of our own people in organized warfare in the last 100 years alone, that doesn't count the murders, the individual murders that have happened, that that such species who have that capability, if they were truly hostile, would have used that proclivity with that technology, and we wouldn't be breathing the free air of Earth today, 60 years after the dawn of the nuclear era. So I think that one of the interesting things, though, is to consider the fact that in our Sea SETI expeditions and also in interviews I have done with classified military personnel who have dealt with retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles and bodies, is that some of these species appear to have descended from, for example, what we would call bird-like creatures that become, instead of flying, are two-legged, two-arm, and a head, but are kind of feathery. Others have encountered ones that appear to have a cetacean sort of quality to them, or a dolphin-like quality. Others have encountered some that appear to be almost like a two-arm, two-leg, and a head praying mantis type intelligent life form that are apparently incredibly intelligent and very gentle, but to someone who would have insect phobia would be kind of freaked out, and et cetera and so on. And so I think that there is the possibility that almost any phyla and any type of animal, in our case, of course, it was primates and what have you, could evolve and have perhaps some augmentation of their development through some sort of mysterious intervention that would lead to an upright man or humanoid that would be from that lineage. That, in other words, we have a primate connection. Others could have a canine connection, or a cetacean connection, or a bird-like pathway, or some other pathway. Of course, it doesn't exist on this planet, but that is a type of animal life or life form that would evolve on other planets. And with that would bring their own qualities and attributes. And I think that any of them, of course, one could make the argument, might have some of the same problems humans have controlling their tendency towards violence, but the likelihood of them traveling interstellar with the level of technology that implies, which we'll get to in a moment, and remaining in a state of unchecked proclivities. In other words, it's one thing to have a capacity for violence, but if it's unchecked to the point of aggression and hostility, it's almost inconceivable that a life form would be able to not have blown itself up or encountered other life forms and blown themselves up long before they would get out of their own solar system, because there appears to be very much a cosmic order and a universal order where evolving planets are observed as Earth is being observed. And, there's a certain litmus test, a certain development in social consciousness and spiritual consciousness that's required before you're let out of your planet very far. I mean, obviously, we did go to the moon, contrary to some conspiracy theorists. It was the footage was hoax, but we in fact did go to the moon. But it isn't as if we're allowed to fly amongst the stars willy-nilly while we're still in the process of engaging in warfare on this planet as humans. And so I have called this the cosmic quarantine that appears to exist around any planet that has not yet become peaceful. And I have this on very good intelligence from people who have worked in the National Reconnaissance Office and the Defense Intelligence Agency, who have told me of our attempts to use some very esoteric things that fly, the man-made UFOs, as it were, the alien reproduction vehicles, to go out into space where we have been not only tracked but at times turned away. And I'll never forget a meeting I had with an analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency who back, I believe in the 70s, was analyzing various photographs that were from satellites. And some of these photographs had pictures of ET spacecraft in them between where the satellite was in space and the Earth. But he also discovered that some of the satellites were turned away from Earth. We're not looking at the Soviet Union or China or someplace, but they were looking out into space. And he asked, what are these satellites imaging, looking away from the planet? And he was told they were looking for extraterrestrial vehicles, and that some of these had become developed enough that they were targeting and tracking and targeting ET craft in a certain sector of space, and that whenever they would try to do that, those satellite systems would be jammed and switched off or disabled by the ETs. And this was causing some consternation and aggravation within these sort of classified projects. I've heard this from more than one person, so I have high confidence that those sort of things have happened. And it isn't that the ETs were hostile, but they were not going to allow us to weaponize space to such an extent that this could really get out of control. And so I think this has created a great deal of tension, by the way, because we have managed the relationship between humans and these extraterrestrial civilizations very poorly, because it's all been through the lens of a sort of military defense posture rather than understanding why they might be here, and that perhaps the concern that exists in the cosmos is that humans have gone from horse and buggies and rifles in the last 100 years or so to space travel and hydrogen bombs and even more esoteric weapons in classified projects that are electromagnetic in nature and so-called scalar or longitudinal weapons. So I think that we really have to look at this, and this is why we really do need to form a council of wise elders on this planet to be involved in this whole question of interplanetary relations and looking at it in a much broader way than sort of a knee-jerk, reactionary military response. Understanding that we do have these proclivities and that obviously if civilizations had the capacity to travel faster than the speed of light from one star system to this star system and to Earth, the likelihood that they would be hostile towards humanity and Earth, given the fact that we've been targeting them, we have downed dozens of these spacecraft, we have gone into space illegally within the classified world with weapons, et cetera and so on, that, if they had an intent that was hostile, it would have been point, set, match, and done with about 1945 when we detonated the first atomic weapon at the Trinity site, so in New Mexico. And I think this is why people need to think about this in a very broad view, is that while you can't prove a negative, many people say, well, can you prove that they're not? I said, well, you can never prove a negative, it's axiomatic, but what we can establish is that the Earth has not been attacked and invaded by these civilizations. On the other hand, we can prove that we have attacked them. So there is certainly a higher level of restraint and consciousness operating there, because with the technologies that they have at their disposal, if they wanted to kick the living daylights out of us, they could have done so and have not. And I think this is not only one of the surest proofs that that we're dealing with very developed societies that are in a higher level of social and spiritual awareness than we've yet attained collectively on Earth, but that we need to have people analyzing this whole situation with calmer minds than have been allowed to, because the people who have been allowed into the very small tent of these classified projects has been a self-selecting group of militarists and frankly, warmongers. And I think this is something we really need to correct.